allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'll take 30 seconds for silent reflection. Thank you. First thing on the agenda is we need the approval of the agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
Second. It's been moved and seconded to approve the agenda. Any other discussion? All in favor, please raise your left hand. Opposed, same. Motion carries. Dinner, if you haven't eaten out. What we're doing, get started. I think everybody's kind of on the same page of what needs to happen here, but I think what our goal today is, after talking with Andy and Robin, is to give some direction to the subcommittee for the boundary study that they've been working on. So first thing we'll do is let you guys give us an update of where we're at and in the process, and then we'll go from there.
Yep.
I'll turn it over to you, Andy.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to cover some things. I think one of the things I think we need to, I want to cover details that may already be known to all of you, just solely because I think the fact that having this board retreat is a great opportunity for us to get together as a board and get this update from the subcommittee and kind of further direction. But also it's just another opportunity for us to communicate to the public. We're streaming this on YouTube. It's a video people can go back and watch later. So it's another opportunity to kind of hit on the major points of everything we discussed. So forgive me if I spend a little time talking on some things that you all know, but I think you just want to capitalize on this opportunity to continue to put information out there about what we looked at and the why behind what we're looking at. So one of the things that I actually mentioned to Dr. Dominguez in our last meeting is what we're really doing is discussing grade reconfiguration. This process that we started this spring was initially a boundary study, but as I think you all recall, what that evolved into was a discussion about grade reconfiguration and the implications of doing that, and just kind of getting us starting to look at that. And ultimately that was the recommendation from that committee, was for us as a board to move this district into a K5, 6-8 grade reconfiguration and utilizing 2 middle schools. So that's really what we've done. And at least in my term, when I talked lately, I try to talk and use that terminology because I think it's way more accurate representation of what we're doing and how what we're essentially looking at trying to understand how to implement. As Randy said, we're going to spend some time tonight. I'm going to walk you through kind of the high points of the meetings we've had. You can kind of see the outline on the board behind us. Robin and Nathan are going to share their thoughts after we do that. But I think what we're looking for as a subcommittee from the board is just some direction as to what to do. I mean, we've dug into some details. We've assessed some options. This is a great opportunity to kind of take a pause, kind of lift our heads up, look around, talk to the rest of the board, get an idea of, are we in alignment with what we want, wants to continue to see us seeking? Do we need to course correct, so on, so we can kind of go back and resume the things that we've been doing. So we've met, in summary, we've met 4 times. And I'm going to kind of just jump to what has really risen to the top in regard to a model of reconfiguration as a result of those 4. And then I'm going to kind of dig in and talk about each one of the 4 meetings and what we looked at and how this analysis has progressed. But the model that really is the focus of our, after some assessment, is utilizing is ending it just as the board, as the boundary committee has suggested, ending it with a K568 permanent reconfiguration of our district. We're currently looking at like a 3-year transition plan from the date that we implement that process to the date that we are at K568. We're looking at the option of transitioning this where at the start of that onset of that 3, we actually go K6 for 3 years while we physically do the work to KH to expand it and make it bigger, to accept the 6th graders that would go to there. That model is looking at 2 middle schools, not necessarily equal sized. KH would still be likely a smaller student population than Horsegood. And we're looking at converting Bernadine Sitz and Charles Stones to elementary schools. Victor Ornelas is being considered as converting it to an early childhood education center, and then closing or repurposing Jenny Barker, Plymel, Gertrude Walker, and Georgia Matthews. So that's really what I would, in summary, is kind of the model that is, after a lot of discussion and an assessment, has risen to be what we are seeing as the right way to convert our district into a K568 district. So then I'm going to kind of back up and I'm going to talk about the meetings, how we arrived at that, and what data we've looked at to go along with that. So meeting number 1 was back on May 23rd, and in that Dr. Minguez led us through kind of a brainstorming session. We all kind of identified amongst the 3 of us board members priorities that we felt we needed to be looking at. And then we spent some time assessing those and kind of identifying commonalities between those. We discussed if the permanent grade reconfiguration for the district should be, in fact, be K5 or K6. We spent some time discussing that. And then we also talked about a transition plan of starting as K5 or K6 for a period of time, and then transitioning into a permanent K5. We discussed the options of middle schools. I believe we reached a consensus in that meeting that we in fact wanted to see we felt like the 2 middle school option that the Boundary Study Committee had suggested was in fact the right one for us. And then we had an open discussion and evaluated the pros and cons of building closures with every elementary school in the district. We just kind of went down the list and said, should we consider this one? What is the pros and cons? To really vet. I mean, as we went through that boundary study, and you all remember, Plymel, Jenny Barker, Gertrude Walker, and Georgia Matthews were identified as the 4 in those scenarios that were presented. We didn't want to just necessarily just forge ahead with that thought alone. So we talked about everything. Jenny Wilson. We talked about Buffalo Jones. Why yes or why no, and we kind of landed back that those 4 that came up in the boundary study scenarios were in fact the ones that we need to be focusing on and looking at. Okay, so that was the summary of meeting number 1. Meeting number 2 took place on June 12th. At that one, we talked a lot about what the size expansion requirement would need to be at KH to accommodate the students necessary, when we bring 6th graders to that building. We reviewed a lot of data, district-wide data at that meeting. So coming into that meeting, administration team had created a folder on the district drive and we walked through a bunch of spreadsheets, and we had a lot of data about everything from staffing, building utilities, everything. And we went through a lot of data, and really, it was all presented to us and then given to us in a way where we as 3 committee members have the ability to go back and kind of dig into that, pull it back up and look at it more as we, assess and digest these ideas on our own. But a lot of data analysis took place at that second meeting. We also spent a lot of time talking about a second early education center. So this is really that discussion revolving around VO and whether that is in fact an early education center or not? What does that mean? Services, because we currently provide 2 half-day preschools and we get funded from the state at a half-day rate. So if we provide all day, we were to split that, and what the cost implications of the district would be. And we talked about whether Head Start program made sense for the district to incorporate into our early education program. And then we presented, we also were presented some cost impact information from transportation. You know, there was a lot of questions that we had heard from the committee about the cost of transportation. Was it going to increase that, cost, but it was also going to increase time students would be on the bus or such. And so we had data from transportation at that second meeting that we looked at. And then we also discussed the idea of whether Georgia Matthews made sense as an early education center. We talked about capacity, how many classrooms we could have there, but that was also discussed at the second meeting. Third meeting took place on June 26th. At that meeting, Dr. Dominguez and his team offered I would say an alternative plan to go to grade reconfiguration, kind of a variation of things we had already talked about. We had a chance, we spent some time reviewing that, discussing the pros and cons of that. So it was great that they brought that to the table and kind of gave us another perspective and another thing to think about. We discussed amongst the 3 of us board members on this committee, the feelings just on everything we discussed it. So it was kind of a check-in meeting, check-in some time amongst the 3 of us, like how, seeing what you've seen now, the discussions you've had, how are we all feeling, how are we feeling about what we're looking at, where should we go, continue to go. So we did that in that meeting. We also requested additional information from administration. We wanted input from legal on the legalities of selling properties. And we know that there's been some legislation, some changes at the state level about what a district has to do to sell a property and getting legislative approval to do so. And so we talked about, if we do close a property with the intent to sell it, what does that look like? What are the mechanics of that we need to be aware of? We requested from Jessica a plan of finance. So at that meeting, we had kind of a rough square footage idea of what we would need to build on to KH. So we wanted to understand, can we do this out of capital outlay? Would it require a lease purchase agreement? Does it need a bond issue? What are we going to do? Is there a way to build that, make that change, and also assuming and just think about everything that might need to happen in all the buildings, and then how do the finances would they play out? We talked about analyzing building utilizations, so we analyzed building utilizations and what it would need to be necessary to be in that ideal range of 75 or 85% amongst our grade schools. And really, that was data that was given to us from RSP. They gave us data about if you close these schools and you redistribute, this is where you're building by building, this is your percentage. So we just kind of spent some time revisiting that a little bit and analyzing that, this really kind of goes, when you take Bernadine Sits and Charles Stones and make them elementary schools, you overall have 13, if you make no other changes, you have 13 elementary schools at that point. And if you equally distribute our student population amongst those, we're going to be down around 50%. And so when we talk about taking 5 of our current elementary schools and either repurposing them or closing them and leaving us with 8 and we would then have 8 elementary schools, that's the order of magnitude that it takes to bring that utilization up into that ideal range where we're operating kind of most efficiently as a district. So we just kind of spent some time revisiting that discussion and asking for some other data on that. But we also asked administration team to reach out to the state and get an idea from KDOT as to what their plan is for US 83. And then we also asked for some information about the options about selling or potentially leasing this building, the ESC. If we were to look, because have been discussing the possibility of maybe Gertrude Walker being repurposed to be our education center, our ESC, and what this building could bring to the equation in regard to plan of financing. Can we sell it? Can we lease it out and that sort of thing? So we asked for some information about what we thought the building would be worth if we sold it, and ideas, can it be leased? Okay, and then our last meeting was on July 10th. We reviewed all the information that was requested in that previous meeting. The administration provided us that information. We also had a discussion at that meeting about the dome situation. So we also know, kind of as this has been transpiring, there's been things going on with the YMCA and the dome. And as we talk about planned expansions to KH, how does that factor into this? And so that was a point of discussion in the July 10th meeting. And then we also talked about a timeline for a decision from the board. As we've gone into this, I think one of the things I've heard many board members say is, if we're going to be closing or repurposing schools, we don't want this to be a shock to anybody, faculty, family, anybody. We want to give as much of a full school year as possible notice to those buildings and those teams, so that we can really celebrate the history of those buildings. We can memorialize the impact those buildings have had on our community, and we can leave on a really positive note and make this transition on a positive note. And so if that is the case, and if this plan of implementation goes into effect, say in the 25-26 school year, where do we need as a board to be making that vote? And then we also talked about, one thing I would encourage us to have a discussion about tonight too, is at what point do you each one of you of us board members feel like there is enough data been assessed to feel comfortable kind of at that jumping off point? Like, we know there are every decision yields another decision, right? Another layer of detail that has to be worked out. And we have to, clearly understand our timeline associated with each one of those. But we have to make a decision at some point when to instigate to commit to the change. And at what level of information and what level of detail is everybody, do we need to arrive at? Because I think what we talked is I think the consensus among the three of us is, we don't want to make any board member have to. I think, Robin, can I quote you or paraphrase you? And you can, because I know you're going to talk to, but one really, really great point that Robin brought up was a concern about having to vote no on something that you might feel is ultimately the right thing for our district, because we haven't reached the point yet where enough information has been assessed to make sure that we're making the right choice, like to rushing the decision, saying no just because we're not quite where you feel comfortable voting. We don't want to rush that, but I think we also need to be really cognizant of the feelings and the impact this is going to have on our students and our faculty. And I think it's prudent we stay on top of this. Like, they all understand that this is something that is being talked about, being actively worked on. This affects a lot of people, and so not dragging this out, not arriving at a decision midway through the school year, and not allowing that time for those buildings to really be memorialized is, I think, important. I mean, as we think about this, the other thing too is we're talking about impacting 8 buildings, or 8 buildings. We're talking about potential closure or repurposing of Plymel, Jenny Barker, Georgia Matthews, Gertrude Walker. We're talking about changing Bernadine, Sis, and Charles Stones from the intermediate centers that they currently are to educate to elementary schools. We're talking about taking BO from an elementary school potentially changing it to an early education center. And then we're talking about bringing sixth graders, well, 9 buildings, because we're talking about bringing sixth graders to both Horace Good and KH. So this is impacting, 9 different buildings of ours. So this is pretty far reaching, and so we definitely want to make sure that I feel like we need to, make sure that we're making a decision in a timely manner, because a lot of people are waiting to figure out what we're going to do. And so, the other just kind of point I had made here to mention was just that, and then this, good as a way to let Nathan and Robin kind of offer up their thoughts and opinions. But this model, what I've kind of opened up with, is really what I think has risen to the top. We spent that first part of these meetings kind of saying, is this even the right plan? Should we be thinking about something else? This all revolves around grade reconfiguration. This is not downsizing, as a district. This is not, we're shrinking. We're talking about reconfiguring the way our entire grade structure amongst our buildings, and that just has this ripple effect through all of our buildings, and so it definitely changes the student populations and the building utilizations at those elementary schools, because we're taking 2 intermediate centers and bringing them in as elementary schools. And that changes that building utilization in quite drastically, and brings a lot of capacity, square footage capacity and classroom capacity into the elementary school level that we don't currently have. And then we got to think about, how do we operate from that point forward? We're really trying to, I think as a board, the way I look at this is we're trying to decide the right future of our district. We want to make sure that we're making good decisions today to set us up for the future. And, there's a lot of reasons why. We can certainly, talk into the details of why this or that is part of this equation. I think there's some variables, some unknowns that I do think, even if, that I already think as we continue, we need to dig into deeper, deciding what that building utilization number needs to be. Do we target being RSP's recommendation and administration agreed was that 75 to 85% is ideal. But, we don't necessarily want to set our utilization off of today's numbers. We know that there's growth plan opportunity here in the city, in the county. We've seen the trends of our own student population, but what do we want to plan for in the future? Should VO, like one of the notes I just wrote, is should VO remain as an elementary school, and should we consider one of the other buildings to be an early education center if we decide to do that? That would obviously make our utilizations lower, but it bakes in more capacity. I think that's just, if we go right back to work, next meeting, that's just the next thing that I want to dive deeper into. Well, ultimately, if we move forward with this plan, we're going to need to assess boundaries. Where students from who goes to what school. I would ideally think it would be best if we can draw boundaries for the K-6 plan, that when we make that transition to K-5, nothing changes. So nobody, living on this side of the street would then end up going to a different elementary school. It might put us at a little higher utilization for that 3-year period when we have our schools holding K-6, but I think it would create a way where we have less disruption and less change for faculty and students. And then we can talk more about just the needs of KH and what all goes into that plan. As we talked about the 3-year plan, and you've heard me mention that, that factors into the plan of finance, and we can dive into details and questions about that. But as we talk about that, what we've been talking about is when we say we start this in the 25-26 school year, those elementary schools that we would close or repurpose, would go into effect that 25-26 school year. They would no longer be education centers or elementary school education centers at the onset, while there's 3-year plan to go through design and construction and expansion onto KH. In doing so, there's a lot of financial elements that come into play and how that helps us, because ultimately, and Jessica can probably dive into details more if we want to, but I think there's a path here to do this out of capital outlay. It doesn't require a lease purchase. It doesn't, we asked in the last meeting with Jessica, like, what's our current, she created a path of what capital outlay would be through that 3-year scenario, and making sure that we don't dip too much into our capital outlay to kind of get below what we need to maintain as a safety net. Because we got all these other buildings we still have to operate and maintain, and we can't deplete that. We need to be wise about how we spend and whether we need to borrow to protect kind of our capital outlay fund. But I believe that there's a way to potentially and we need to dive deeper with it and get a little bit more into the weeds, but there looks like there could very well be an opportunity to do this and not have to take out a loan, not have to go do a lease purchase and operate it through capital outlay. But implementing the closure or repurposing of those buildings on the onset of that 3-year phasing plan is critical to making the funds available to do this. So I covered a lot. I can certainly answer a question or circle back. Shared a little bit about my own thoughts and idea about this is sprinkled in there as well, but just take a pause. Like, what thoughts or questions do any of you have?
I like to just start with the other two
Okay,
committee members
Sounds good.
and see what they think.
sounds great. Okay.
So I appreciate Andy. Pretty much everything Andy shared was a great summary of all that we've been through and all that we've gone through and what we've looked at. Just looking at the various options, I don't have a whole lot actually to add to what Andy shared there because he did a great job with the details on it. We did do a lot of research, and the staff did a great job. I appreciate all of them that have helped us. I had them create some boundary maps with some dry erase stuff on it. I still want to draw on those and kind of get into that. And we've not had the opportunity just because I've been traveling on those meetings. But so some of those things will happen. I look at this, what we're going through here, and Andy phrased it a little bit of the consolidation process, as we kind of phrasing it that way. As I've been thinking about it more, it's streamlining our educational system that we have here. It's making it more efficient, better for the kids, educational wise, better for the teachers, better for the entire school community where we're at. And so to think about it is we're streamlining what we're doing. We're getting rid of some stuff that may just be outside the boundaries. As I tour buildings this year and have meetings with several principals and talking with different things going on in their buildings, yes, it's going to be a change to staff if we do this, and we need to do this though. It's something that they may not have all the extra rooms for a counselor to have a whole room for the whole year. They may not have certain things, and so from the staff side of it, I can see how, and being an educator, I can tell you, we will use whatever space we're given. And that's just being a teacher. But that's not necessarily the best use of space. And so as we've talked through this, looked at the data, everything Andy shared has been right on track of where we need to go. At least what I feel. I'm in agreement with that. I will tell you up front, I did push back a little bit on the 3-year transition, what that would look like. That's just my personal thing. Like, let's just bite the bullet, go for it, and move past it and make the adjustments and figure it out. But as we've talked more, looked at the data, really analyzed everything, where we're going, how we're going, I found that will probably be the best plan financially for us with the least amount of change that we could handle at one time. So we're going to be making shifts in stages instead of all at one time. And so I've come to an agreement with that. Putting the 6th graders in for a few years here to adjust some of that while we get to that 3 years. Now you might ask, and one question I ask, why the 3-year window? Well, that's basically what it's going to take to get the construction process designed, built, put into place, and get everything ironed out for a final change then in 3 years to make that final adjustment. So I agree with all of those things. Want to make sure we understand it is what's best for all kids. And There have been times in my life, and I say this, that I've had situations where I've been misplaced or lost my job in different situations, and I didn't realize at the time it was the best thing for me. I was mad about it, I got aggravated about it, but looking back in hindsight, 20 years later, I see it's what was the best plan for me. And so as we make decisions, we're gonna have to make some decisions that people are not gonna be happy, and I'm okay with that. We just gotta figure that out because we all don't know, we're all in this together, we're all making the best plan that we have at this moment right now. And so it's one of those things that we're just gonna have to keep moving forward. I am a big fan of the sooner we make a decision about the buildings, then we can make other decisions based on that. And so we talked a lot about that in the meetings, or how do we need to make a decision soon so we can start making other decisions that follow that. And so when Andy talked about making it here sooner than later, that's definitely one thing that I really would encourage us to really hone in on, and making a decision in the next couple months, really just nailing that down so we can continue. Okay, now we've had this, where we go from here, and then we can help other people make plans and help navigate that process. Definitely, there's a lot of data out there, a lot of finances, things that we're looking at, trying to make it better. And so I really don't have much more than that to add to the conversation, other than it's been quite a process. And you don't know what you don't know until you're in the middle of things. And there's just a lot of things that we've gone through, we've talked about, we've argued about a little bit and had conversations about what would be the best, where we could go. But I think we're on a very good pathway and to making good things happen for our community. And so that's financially, as well as we got at the last meeting update. But we're not going to have to do a bond issue to build on, I don't think, with our capital outlay. There's just a lot of things falling into place to make it a very successful transition, and working through that and making it better for the entire community. So that's my 2 cents worth. I'll let Robin talk now.
So, I agree with everything that Andy said. He did a phenomenal job of summarizing 4 long, intense meetings with emotions kind of all over the place. I kind of felt like the lone wolf for a while because for me, I always look at things like I've run my own business for 20-something years. So I always compare things to like my business and how does it compare to my business. My business, I sell technology and that's my product. And my customers are important to us, to the fact that we don't do some things that other technology companies do because it may not be beneficial to my customers. It might make me a lot of money, but it might not be beneficial to my customers. So that's like where my moral, ethical thing, kind of how I do my own business. And at the school, our customers are our students and our product is an education. So it's not the same as a business, but it is the same. And we have way more employees than my 6 little people that I have in my business, but I think we owe them the same value of their importance, because without those people, we can't serve the other people. So for me, the people part is a really big portion of this. And the data, I mean, the staff has done a fantastic job and all the data makes perfect sense. And on paper, you can tell exactly why this needs to be done. But there's people at the bottom of the paper. And so I don't want to forget those people and I don't want to push through this quickly and then be like, oh man, we should have thought about this, or oh, we should have thought about that. And so for me, I agree with the guys that making the decision sooner is better, but if we don't implement it till 27, 28, I'm okay with that. If we need that amount of time to logistically figure everything out. And I made the statement, I said, there are some things that for me are gonna be I have to have this information before I can vote yes. And so I don't wanna have to vote no for something that might very well need to be done because we didn't think it through, we didn't process things well enough. And one thing that I did wanna say, and Andy sort of touched on this, I think that during the boundary study meetings, everyone got so wrapped up in closing these buildings that the part of the big piece of that just got forgotten, and that's the reconfiguration. And that we are gonna be closing 2 schools and shifting those students somewhere else. So it's not that we just said, oh, hey, we need to close these schools. It's so much more complicated than that, because now we have, if we close the elementary or the intermediate centers and we didn't do anything with them, we could keep the other schools open, so, you know, but then we still have 2 empty buildings, and there are 2 nicer, biggest buildings, so that doesn't really make sense. And I think Andy said that at the last meeting, I'm pretty sure you were the one that said it, we're not really downsizing, we're right sizing. And that made sense to me. So basically, I just listed a lot of questions or concerns that I have, things that don't necessarily have to be completely set in stone, but at least a plan before I'm comfortable saying yes, and I agree with this plan. I wish I didn't, but I agree with this plan. But there are things that I need to feel comfortable doing it. So I'm just gonna read, I didn't want to forget anything, so I just wrote it all down. The buildings. So I think we need to have some type of a plan for the physical structures so that we don't have what happened to Friend happen, that it just sits there with no utilities, no maintenance until it crumbles to the ground. And that might look like we're going to do minimal maintenance and keep utilities on in these buildings for 2 years, because we want to make sure that something new isn't really coming to town and all of a sudden we have, you know, an influx of 600 new students overnight. That's, as long as that's part of the plan and we know that's what we're doing, I'm okay with that. But it's part of the plan, and it's something that we all understand is gonna happen. The principals. So I've talked to several people, and there's a lot of people that have concerns about this. How are we gonna reallocate those principals? Does somebody do we decide we have co-principals, or do we have, how do we just determine which principal becomes an assistant and which one is the main? Because again, we already have shortage of employees, so we need to do this as best as we can so we don't have a mass exodus of people leaving because they don't like how we did it. Teachers, how do we move the teachers into new buildings and be respectful of their desires? We can't be held hostage by teachers saying, well, if you do this, I'm gonna quit. That puts us in a bad place, but we need to be aware that they have free will and they can go wherever they want to. So the better we do this, the better our chances of not having that mass exodus. How do we create environments that encourage cooperation and new cultures? And how can we assist with that transition from the top down? And like I said, I thought about a lot of things. So you guys might think I'm crazy. It's just have a really random brain. So like school mascots, what happens to school mascots? What if somebody never wanted to be a cougar and now all of a sudden they have to be a cougar because their school, you know, joined? Building names. What are we gonna do with the names of the buildings that we're retiring? How are we gonna continue to honor the people that were being honored by that? Do we name something different after them, an auditorium, a gymnasium, the C, you know, who knows? But how do we still make those families feel like we're not choosing to no longer honor the people that have been honored for several years? How do we engage admin, teachers, parents to see the potential good that can come from the consolidations? Dr. Dominguez had a really good point. There may be things that we can do better when we're not spreading some of our resources so thin. Gym, art, music, eventually understanding that we got a 3-year plan that might take us to get there, but what can we do better when we are not spreading those resources so thin? How do we concentrate more on the positives and less on the negatives? You know, do we take a group of people from each of the buildings that are potentially going to be closed and have them help us come up with what this plan looks like. So they're involved in the process and they don't feel like they're just being shoved out and they don't matter. Information is powerful. Information relieves anxiety. I had a counselor tell me that one time, and it made perfect sense to me because I kind of have anxiety and I like information. So it made sense to me. So information relieves anxiety and fear, and open, honest, transparent communication builds trust. And when we trust people and we're not afraid, we can walk through any kind of a hard thing. So how do we build that trust with the public and with the teachers and with the students, and provide as much information as we can, understanding that sometimes in our world, there are things that we legally can't share at a certain time. But how do we build that so that this is a success? Andy asked Drew one day, what school district has done this well? And Drew said, really not any. And I'm like, okay, like let's make this be our goal. And we're gonna be the school district that says, this is how you reconfigure and consolidate things and you're successful at it. And oh yeah, everyone 4 years in is like, oh my gosh, this is so much better. I'm so glad they did this. I'm so glad we got on board. And I think when we have the support of all the players, it's not as hard as it sounds. So, I mean, it's going to be asking a lot of people to, you know, put aside personal feelings and having a tunnel mindset instead of having a wider mindset of what's best for the entire district. So those are just some of the things that I have been bouncing around in my head. There are some facts that are just, you know, they're facts. The enrollment is declining. But I don't know that that's the only place that we focus on, you know. Utilizing our buildings well and making the best experience possible for every student in our district. That's what I think all 7 of us got on this board for. So how can we do that? And I don't think we can do it alone. I think we need the help of the public. So however we can engage them to make this work, ultimately knowing that the final decision lays with the 7 of us. And we may have to make some hard decisions, but I think we're up to the task and we can tackle it. And we have to balance the best use of money and resources with what's best for the human element of our district. So, that's all I got.
Just, you know, you're talking about a 3-year plan. I mean, how deep did you get into? What does that really entail? I mean, I know you talked a little about the financing and I think doing up here at KH construction that we're gonna need in order to bring more students into KH. But beyond that, what all did it get into as far as?
So
Yeah, go ahead.
one of the things that we're talking about, if we're needing direction, if we go forward, I even in my own head had planned out to lay out a timeline of each of these areas and have worked with staff on laying around everything that Rob had mentioned there. What's the timeline look like for this? What does the timeline look like for this? So we have not gotten into all of that yet. This is, once we have direction, this is where we're going to go. This is what we want to do. Now we'll build that timeline out so that we can be prepared to present.
Maybe I was wrong, but part of what I understood was the financing in order to do it.
Yeah.
We can't just do this all at once.
Yeah, I think where the 3-year, when the timeframe came from, was thinking about sort of to accommodate 6th grade population at KH. If we keep roughly the same boundaries we have now between KH and North Good, we'd have to add about 13,500 square feet onto that building. Not including if we decide to put a gym on there, an additional gym on there, but classroom, corridor, bathroom space, kind of cumulatively, we worked with GMC and architects to help us develop that. And just thinking through that overall timeframe of once we commence, like, or commit to doing that and start design and then go through construction, that's, I would say, from the time we say, this is what we're going to do, let's start the path down that path of designing and building it, to the day students have it, and we figure that's a 3 school year overall program. And then with that, knowing that, and kind of understanding kind of the cash flow expenditures over that window that we would spend paying for the design services, paying for the construction as it gets paid for incrementally as it's being built. What would that cash flow, what would that cash flow model need to look like? We have, Colleen and Shane worked really hard and developed a really, really good detailed capital outlay plan for all of our buildings through 2030. So we know, based off needs and rankings and priorities, we know planned capital outlay expenditures at every building in our district. And we're able to look at that and say, if we make this commitment and we, at the onset of this, and we do a transition plan and we consolidate and take and retire those buildings, then we no longer need to do this HVAC upgrade that would hit during the second year of that window and all. And so all of a sudden, these planned capital outlay expenditures are no longer expenditures, and those same budgeted funds become part of the plan of finance for building KH without having to go borrow or do a bond issue. So we it's really the design and construction timeframe is what kind of set the parameters for this. And then with that, we then asked Jessica, okay, work the numbers backwards. We had an idea of cost of construction for that. And then knowing if that's the plan, and here's kind of a bell curve of what you'd spend through that process. How would our capital outlay, without, making any major changes to how we are currently budgeting for this year and future years, how would our capital outlay be able to come into play and work this out? So any other thoughts or between?
Yeah, I think our thoughts for this meeting tonight was present to you what we've done, what our concerns are, and then get at the end of the night, after we all have had some conversation. Yeah, I think this is a good plan. We need to move forward really fast. I think this is the stupidest plan I've ever heard. If 4 people think that this is not what we need to do, then it's silly for the 3 of us to keep going to these meetings and trying to bash out something. So some general direction with some finite time frame to make some kind of a decision, maybe not the final decision, but what that looks like. So that's kind of what we want from you guys tonight.
Well, the grade reconfiguration makes sense. We've talked about that. I don't think there's been any dissent there in K5, K6 for a period of time, K5, whatever, to get there. But I don't think there's been anyone that's expressed any concern there. I certainly don't have any with that. Getting people involved in the process and helping with this, it slows down the process, but I understand why when I do that. And then on the other hand, the decision is going to have to be made fairly soon. And I don't know what fairly soon means right now. A couple of months, maybe, I don't know. In order to move forward on this in the time frame we're talking about, the 25, 26, man, can't wait until, I don't think, sometime in the late fall or winter time to do this. But that's my thought anyway, that at this point in time that we are going to have to come to a decision before too long. This is what we're going to do. Regardless of what we are going to do, we're not going to make everybody happy. I think we all know that.
Right.
And I know there's a lot of emotion on some of these schools, and there will be. And I think if we can make sure that folks understand why we are doing what we are doing and understand, they may not agree, but if they can make sure that we get that information out to the public, that this is what we are doing and here's why we are doing that information, that would be helpful. Because some folks will understand that. They may not be happy with it, but they'll understand it. Nobody's going to want to pay more taxes just to keep buildings open. I don't think. I haven't talked to anybody yet that it doesn't. And if we keep down the student enrollment where we're at right now, I mean, I hear we're having an announcement in June, now we're in July, some big thing coming. I don't know what it is. That we're gonna have more students. I don't know. I haven't heard anybody that's come up with some RSPs giving us the numbers. The city came in and talked a little bit to us. Those don't quite jive, but 3-year plan gives us an opportunity also to, if something does happen, then we have, I think, a window there that we can adjust as need be.
Well, and I think in my mind, if we come out of this meeting and there's consensus amongst the board that figure, this is like, keep working these details out. I think that is one of the big things we need to dive a lot deeper in, because before we can start redrawing boundaries, we have to really decide what we're doing with these schools. And to me, VO is the variable, because whether that building stays in elementary school or gets changed to an early education center. One part of me really thinks the VO should stay in elementary school. And if we build an early education center, or not build, but make one of the other buildings, it solely because we are seeing most of our growth on the north and east side of town. Even though you would have 2 elementary schools pretty much right across the street from each other, they could geographically serve, different parts. VO could do, can do everything in one direction geographically, and Stones could do another, and so I think that might allow us to put our student population, we would be a little running on the low end of that building utilization going into that plan if we did not make the change. I know Josh has talked about, he's been giving us insight about what's the state, doing about thinking about going to all-day preschool. We have how many kids enrolled at Garfield right now?
At the end of the year, we were a little over 600.
So we have 300 in the morning, 300 in the afternoon. If we went to, if the state required, and I would suspect if the state issued a mandate, they would give every school district years to prepare or to adjust and get to that point. But if we were required to ever provide all-day preschool, then we have to find room for just to stay in a certain number of students that we'll bring in. We'd have to be able to do 300 more students in a different building. So maybe, and I'm just kind of getting into my own thoughts and ideas of where we should think next, but maybe that's where I would encourage us as a committee to go and dive really deep into and more if the consensus is, continue to work this out, plan, go deeper. I think we really need to dive into that. What are our student population trends, and where do we want to operate at? And do we, like Robin said, do we operate, do we leave a little capacity, whether it's a building that's, just not occupied, but still online, the lights and electrical and heating is still on, and we just, or do we operate just as an education center and just have a lower population for a while, and then maybe if the need arises, then at the end of there is a conversion of one building to an early education center. I think the key though is like going into this, I think I'm looking at this like eyes wide open, like the USD-457 in Garden City and Finney County, very well are going to see growth that in 10, 15 years, there may need to be another elementary school, and it may need to be out on Farmland Road, east of town, because there's continuous growth out there. We've got to make good decisions as we address grade reconfiguration and operationally now, so that we all hope to see the continued growth of our community, but when that happens, people look back at the decisions we made today and said, we position the district well to do that. And it's not thought of as, oh, they really made some bad choices. Now they got to come back and build an elementary school. No, it's planned. Like, we're making the best decisions with the student populations we have now, the resources we have now, to be in that and to operate well and continue to operate well, so that when that next milestone in our community happens and we have growth that, we'd love to see. Maybe we have to do a bond issue in 15 years to build an elementary school, but we're positioned because of the good decisions that we make now, that we're not making a decision out of duress in the future.
I did go to the city commission meeting Tuesday afternoon, and they did pass the RHID, the Reinvestment Housing Incentive District. It was somewhere around 4.275 million that passed, and that's up in the north part of the city. So that did happen. And Spirit Construction, I think, is one that.
Lost River. So,
think at the very least, we need to know tonight for direction, if we all still think that the K-568 is the ultimate thing we want to go to, and understanding that that's going to look like some changes at the elementary level with buildings. And then, I think that's the very least that we need tonight. So, I mean, I like hanging out with these guys. They're really cool, but I don't want to waste their time or my time.
Yeah, from the top.
First off, I just want to thank you three. I know you've been on this committee for 7 months from the time it started to, the board asking you guys to continue on as a subcommittee and put all the work in. So I appreciate y'all, and I know it's been a lot of time and a lot of data to review and a lot of work. So first I want to say that. To go into like a little bit of what you guys talked about tonight, I really like the vision of the staged approach. I think change is hard, but I think if we communicate the change and we do it in a staged approach, I think we can lessen the heartache of the change opposed to just, hey, on this day, we're ripping the Band-Aid off and doing everything. I think it'll be easier for our parents. I think it'll be easier for our students. I think it'll be easier for our staff and our administrators. So I really like the vision of the staged approach of going to the K-6, 3 years, and then going to the K-5 as our ultimate goal. The other part of that I really like is the fiscal responsibility that comes with that, to where we can save enough money by repurposing some buildings, but then also budgeting in some funds where we can do it out of capital outlay opposed to having to go borrow money or anything like that. So the fiscal side of that I really like as well. I do have a couple questions, I think, and a couple things that I'd like to clear up that I think the community maybe has a misconception about. I think the first thing that I would like to clear up is that we're raising class sizes. I hear that a lot in the community, and that we're going to make the classes bigger. Well, class size is set by board policy and is capped. So we are not changing board policy on class size. We do have some classes that are being underutilized, that those students may be into a class that is closer to the capacity that the board set, but we are not raising class size. So I just want to kind of clean that up. Some of the other questions that were common in the boundary study or the reconfiguration was, the busing study, financial data. I just have a question for you guys. Is that data able to be presented to the public in a way that they can help understand? I think there was a lot of questions from the public is, hey, kids are going to be on the bus longer and all that. If we went through that data, is there value in sharing that with the public to say, well, actually not, kids aren't going to be on the bus longer? And then also some of the financial, some of the questions that we had was, hey, why are we closing this? We haven't seen any of the financial. How does that make sense? I understand we can't open the book completely to everybody on everything, but is there an opportunity to share some of that with the public to say, okay, because we have a lot of smart people in our community that pay attention and understand finances, and sometimes their resistance is out of emotion, but when they actually see the data, data will help kind of level out some of that emotion. So that's just questions I have. I don't know if that data can be shared, but if it can be shared, I think that's part of what Robin was talking about, with, group communication, helps build trust, just being completely transparent. So I think some of that would be good. The other question that I had is, I know you guys have mentioned, Andy, you did a great job of laying that stuff out, but talked about building utilization and stuff like that. Have you guys looked at teacher utilization? As far as I know, we have a teacher shortage. We're always trying to fill certain number of teachers positions. We always have a shortage. My hope is, and I think I know the answer to this, but by repurposing and streamlining our educational program or our system here in Garden City, we can utilize the teachers that we have now to help with that, and we'll have less teacher openings and less need for more and more teachers, we can utilize the teachers that we have. But I just was wondering if teacher utilization had been evaluated. And then the other thing, Andy, you touched on, and it's been a concern of mine, I mentioned it in other board meetings, is Florence Wilson. I think that if you look at our, you know, our community, it continues to move from west, southwest to northeast, northeasterly. And it's not that our community is necessarily growing, but maybe transitioning from west to east. And having a building like Florence Wilson with the size of Florence Wilson, the quality of structure that Florence Wilson is, I do have concerns about putting it as an early childhood because I think it sits right in the heart of the growth as the community continues to grow that way. So my question about Florence Wilson is, if it is repurposed to a early childhood center, and our town continues to grow west to east, or we get new growth in the east, northeast, how much transition does it take to take that building from an elementary school to an early childhood and go back from an early childhood to to an elementary? I mean, is that?
You're talking to
You talk of VO.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, sorry. I don't know why I wrote down VO, but I was thinking about VO, but no, or Florence Wilson, but VO on the east side of town, if we transition VO to an early childhood, what does that look like? And if we need to reverse that and go back to say, hey, we need elementary space, what does that look like? Because I think if you look at, I think what got me onto Florence Wilson was if you look at Charles Stone's, you know, VO, Florence Wilson and Bernie and Sitz, those four buildings are great buildings and they're positioned perfectly in the growth line of Garden City, as far as our education buildings. So just what's it take to transition them and would it take to transition them back if we need that room?
One thought, if I didn't say it at the meeting, I meant to say it. As we get more fiscally responsible, going through these things and transitions and streamlining things better, is at some point building something like in the 10-year window out further east in the area. I think somebody talked about it. Building something out in that area off of Farmland Road or wherever. I think the city actually is like setting aside some land in some developments, future developments, for us to be able to do something like that. So it'll help accommodate some of that growth that VO wouldn't have to transition back and forth, I guess, if that makes sense. So that's the answer to that. Teacher utilization, we have not really dug much into that. I mean, just logistically, maybe I missed it at the meeting, but.
Josh, you're the one that said, like, transitioning to early childhood or back is not.
It's surprisingly pretty minimal. I mean, when I took over at Garfield, you know, Garfield was an elementary school. Really the only, like the toilets and things like that, we didn't lower those. They stayed the way they were, you know, because if kids are going out to restaurants or they're going out in the public, they're not gonna have many toilets. And so we just put little stools in there and things like that for them to, you know, to learn how to use them. I did have the guys from maintenance come in because the coat racks were too high. The kids can read the coat racks. So we had to lower some things, had to, you know, to reach down to them, but nothing major like plumbing or things like that we had to do.
There wouldn't be a lot of cost with going.
The only thing that I would want to talk to an architect about, Garfield was kind of grandfathered in, when we did Garfield with VO transitioning to an all new early childhood center. The only thing that I would question is, I know that law now, you have to have for kindergarten and below, you have to have an egress door on every single classroom. So like when we built on the addition at AP, when we had the last bond issue, that little kindergarten section, every one of those classrooms that we built on, they had to have an egress door. So I don't know if you would have to do that since it's already a built building. It's an established building and that's just on new construction, or if that would be something when we converted it where we would have to put doors in. That would be the only expense just off the top of my head that I would, and Andy, you might know that better than I would.
I don't know the answer to that.
But I know that would be the only thing that I would question that we may have to pick up a cost for. And I don't see that as probably being a huge expense, but it would be an expense for sure.
If we ever go back to elementary school, we wouldn't have to reverse that.
No, the doors would just be there. We wouldn't have to pay to take them out, obviously, but.
Do the playgrounds, the type of playground equipment we have there. And maybe that would be, you need different size playground equipment for younger kids. That sort of thing has been discussed. I mean, we did talk at one meeting a little bit about how this would affect staffing.
Yeah, so our staffing, basically through attrition, you know, as we've seen our student body numbers decrease at the elementary level, we've essentially lost staffing through attrition and cut back staffing through attrition. So the regular classroom elementary teacher, we're operating very efficiently. The issue that we have is really in our specials, in our PEs, in our art, music, those sorts of special classes that have to go from building to building. That's not overly efficient to be able to, you know, for them to have to move from building to building, from this place to that place. So that's essentially where we would become a lot more efficient. Those guys wouldn't have to be split between 2 or 3 buildings anymore.
Can you talk a little bit just about if we were to retire, say, 4, 5 elementary schools, those teachers, what kind of the initial, at least your initial thoughts on what would go along with that?
Yeah, so it kind of goes back to what you said before. Nothing in any of these plans has anything to do with class size. So all those teachers are moving into another classroom. It's just a classroom in a different building to be determined. So none of the class sizes are going to increase because our staff size isn't going to decrease, because we set our staff size based off our student population size. So we determine how much we staff by what our student population is. Is that kind of what you're asking?
So, for example, here in the next week, enrollment was finished up today or finished up tomorrow. But Drew and I will sit down next week after that's all done, kind of look at numbers, and so then we'll determine if we need to open and close sections, move things around. I mean, usually there's 1 or 2 sections that pop up that we didn't know, you know, that you have to address.
And it's a common thing. People probably don't really realize, but it's a common thing for us here in a month from now, or not a month, in 2 weeks from now, to take a teacher from building X and move them over to building Y, because we don't need this kindergarten classroom here. We need a kindergarten classroom over there. Essentially, we're doing this is the same thing, except on maps as opposed to, but it really has nothing to do with increasing classroom size. Classroom size is set by the board at, you know, 21, 23, you know, for those minimums. So that's all set by the board. And we've never, as long as I've been here, I'm not sure we've deviated from those classroom sizes. So it's set by the board, and it's set by student population on how many teachers we have.
Anything else, John?
Yeah, so I think I'd just follow that up with, I mean, I know these 3 board members have been on this project for 7 months, but I also know our administration has been on this process for that long. And I know that as board members, we've requested a lot of data from you guys, and you've had to do extra work on top of what you currently do. So I want to thank you guys for that. And I guess from my standpoint, as far as a consensus, I think that's what you guys are looking for, is to continue down the path of a phased approach to this, to go from, you know, where we are today to a K-6 and eventually get to a K-5 or 2 middle schools and add on to KH. I would be in favor of continuing down the path that you guys have started.
Jackie?
I don't have a whole lot more to add. GC Achieve, stay where it's at.
Yeah, so far we haven't really talked about any changes to Horse Good, anything services at the JDA. I mean, the only thing to Horse Good would be they would get 6th graders in the change. Do you see anything that would affect anything at JDA?
No, I mean, the big question is what does that KH edition look like? You know, just making sure that we're cognizant of, we don't want to go and put Horse Good at 98%, you know, so making sure that we're cognizant of
you know, what is Force Good gonna be at once we add sixth graders? What percentage of sixth, seventh, eighth graders do we want each building to be at? And, as long as we're being cognizant of what that looks like with the student population of Force Good, it should have no effect on GC Achieve.
I don't really have any disagreements, anything anybody said. I just would like to be sure that closing and changing that many schools, that there is plenty of room for growth for probably at least a 10-year period, because I don't know that a bond would pass anytime before 10 to 15 years. And I don't want to be scrambling, trying to find places to put kids because there was growth. Other than that, just being sure as some of these changes come about and talked about, that all the staff in those buildings, not necessarily completely involved with it, but just very informed of it. So there's no surprises.
I'll kind of just go through my notes. The way I look at this is, I feel like we're biting off more than we can chew. And I say that based on this. I look at this, any one of these projects that we're trying to do on its own would be a tremendous task. The grade reconfiguration, a reboundary study, even if we weren't changing nothing, and closing schools. I feel like those are just, each one of those are monumental tasks. And I think us throwing them all together is dangerous for us as a district. There's so many unknowns. We're making decisions that could have dire effect on this district based off unknowns. And that scares the heck out of me. It really does. I'm the type of person that I want to know what I'm getting into. And I'm afraid that we're going to make all these huge decisions. And then 5 years from now, when we're going to the public and saying, hey, you want to give us $100 million so we can build 2 more schools? Because we closed down 5 of them 3 years ago. I think I'm scared of that. That scares me. It really does. The all-day preschool thing scares me, or it's all-day kindergarten, isn't it?
Pre-K.
Yeah.
Pre-K.
If that happens, that's 300 kids we all of a sudden have to do something with. I do like the idea of maybe if we do decide to close some buildings or whatever, keeping something online for future what ifs, if that happens. What pops in my head, what we had talked about a long time ago, is Georgia Matthews, is that a big enough school that it could be a pre-K? I don't know. Is that a viable deal, or?
Yeah,
Because if I remember right on that plan of Shane's, that school's in good shape.
it's in really good shape.
Yeah.
It is. There's 13 classrooms there, so it would be significantly smaller than Garfield, but it could still be an early childhood center, and it would be a good one. I mean, the thing, I think the benefit to that is they're both centrally located in the center of town, so that would be good. I think the proximity between the 2 schools would be good as far as collaboration between those 2 buildings, because early childhood centers are pretty unique buildings. I mean, I think there's possibilities there, but we wouldn't have the growth that we would have at a building like BO,
Yeah.
but.
And the reason my mind goes to that building is because it is a smaller building, so to use that building for a different idea of repurposing, I think is a little more challenging. Because if we need another elementary school now, that's a smaller one, so maybe it doesn't meet our needs. So that's why I throw that out there, maybe to think of. Another thing that was brought to my attention that I really didn't think about on Monday, somebody said to me that they understand that we voted to raise the revenue neutral rate, right? So they're like, there's a chance we raise the mill levy. Yes, there is. But yet they brought up a good point of, you're gonna raise my taxes and my mill levy, but you're closing down 5 schools. They didn't really understand that, and I think that's where you come in with what John said. If we can show these people the numbers, maybe it's a little easier for them to swallow in the community. If we can actually show them dollars and cents, and this is repurposing and this and that. So I bring that up to the board also, and I think everybody's thought of that. And I do bring this up just because we are elected officials. If you took a poll in the community, I'm gonna tell you right now, I don't think the community supports what we're talking about. They don't. And that's where we say we have to make hard decisions. And I get that. And we do, and I'm willing to make them, and so is everybody at these tables. But we do gotta remember something. We are voted in by the people. So if they don't support this, then are we doing the right thing? Is that the right decision? And it still may be, and that may be still what we do. But I do think we have to think about this, because I've talked to hundreds of people about it. And I've yet to have one person agree with shutting down any schools, except one guy. He thought intermediate centers were the greatest thing ever. He thinks we should keep that, the 5-6 model. That was the only person that's ever agreed. Now, once I sit down and explain dollars and cents and building utilization and this and that, they start to understand it. But yeah, I've yet to still have anybody agree with it. I really haven't. I'm sure you guys have had people that have, but they have not came to me yet. And I'm sorry, I was taking notes, thinking out loud, so that's where I'm going with this. I did have a nice conversation with Matt Allen the other day. And we were talking, he brought up some very good points to me that I haven't thought of, that the numbers we talked, Mark brought it up, RSP's numbers, city's numbers, somewhere in the middle is the right answer for that. But he did say something to me that really made sense. The RHID just got passed, $4.7 million. They have another one, new development coming. And I do have a hard time believing that these people, these developers and builders, are going to spend that kind of money and then not do anything. So I do have to kind of believe that there is some kind of growth coming. If these people are willing to spend that kind of money, that there's something in the works. There's something, or they believe in the growth of Garden City. So that scares me a little too, that these people are willing to spend that kind of money. Are we doing the right thing by, trying to right size it? I do love that term. That's a great term. We still are, I do have a hard time shutting down the farm schools. I really do, just based on the fact of 2 reasons. We base all these numbers off utilization, right? Jenny Barker's over capacity, right? It's running at what, 135%? So how do we shut that school down if we're basing everything we're doing off building utilization? Obviously there's a need for that. Is the right thing we shut down Jenny Barker and build a new Jenny Barker, a bigger school? I don't know. Maybe that, that's in the future. The growth of the city is probably going to continue northeast. So I have a fear of shutting down any school on the northeast side. I like what somebody said earlier about VO, can we transition that back to an elementary school if needed, if the city continues to grow that way? And then Southwinds, that area, agriculture kids, we still are a farm community. There still is going to be a need for some of those rural schools. Just the matter is, can we fiscally afford to keep it open? I think there is a need there. I just don't know financially we can afford it. But I support not closing them schools right now. I think Shane and Colleen, that plan that they put in place, I think it's very good. It has very good direction. And I think if we follow that, we'll be okay for the deferred maintenance and everything else that's happened at some of these schools.
Well, along those lines, I'm frustrated that I feel like somewhere way before anyone in this room was around, decisions were made that kind of are shoving us to a decision that we might not have made if those buildings would have been taken as good a care of as Georgia Matthews, which is not quite as old as them, but in the ballpark, and it's been taken great care of. So it is frustrating to feel like we're trying to solve something that someone else's problem.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we're all in that boat because none of us are long-term board members, so
Yeah,
all of
yeah.
us are having to.
And the administration as well.
Yeah, yeah.
It started way
Totally.
before any of this
Now,
administration.
unfortunately, we have to pick up the pieces for it.
That's been a long term. I remember when I was on PTO at Plymouth, there were several meetings with administration on the lack of maintenance and the lack of care and their want to close down Jenny Barker and Plymouth. I mean, and that was 15 years ago.
Well, I think the thing we've got to make sure that we communicate well in this is that we haven't really gone into the weeds talking about anything related to why those 4 elementary schools are the ones that we're talking about closing or repurposing, but it's deeper than, it's not just a cost-driven thing, it's safety. I mean, for me, I look at our 2 country schools and it's a safety and security issue. It's a police response time issue in regard to how far away they are from town and the amount of time it would take police to respond to either one of those schools, and we can't do anything about that. We cannot make any decision that's gonna make that police response time closer. That just has to do with the physical location of that building. But I think it's important to really address the narrative around this because it is so easy to think of this in the context of we're closing schools. I had a past board member, one who was on the board back in the 90s when the intermediate centers were put into place. Reach out to me and encourage me in what we're doing and saying that they and I'm paraphrasing here, but they were basically saying that was always kind of a solution, a temporary solution to an overpopulation issue they were facing at that time. Our population is different now. Our student population is different now. And then I think, we've had two focus groups tell us in the last 5 years that to go to K-568 model. There was a group dedicated solely to that in 2018 and 2019, and they delivered a recommendation to the board in 2019 to suggest to go to a K-568 model. And I wasn't on the board back then, from what I understand, that was received by the board, and then COVID hit and, focus shifted elsewhere. In this boundary study, that in the second meeting, there was a unanimous vote amongst all the committee members in that room to do this, to go to K-568. And that's what really spurred the development of those 2 scenarios, and eventually that third hybrid that got discussed through that process. But then there was a board member, and one specifically reached out to me and said, or in a conversation we had said, if I'd have known that voting to redo grade reconfiguration was going to result in a discussion about my child's school getting closed, I don't know that I would have voted the same way. So that question went back to the committee at the last committee meeting. It said, in light of everything we've talked about and the implications which have now kind of been painted for this, how do you feel? And I don't know the exact number. It was not unanimous anymore, but it was, 85%. Dr. Mears, can you help me out?
Probably about 85, yes, sir.
So somewhere in that range of the people on that committee still voted to do the grade reconfiguration. And so I think it's really important, and I think you've brought up a ton of really good points and concerns. And I think we have to really make sure that this is understood by everyone, that this is the changes that are required to do grade reconfiguration. And the big catalyst here is when our two intermediate centers become elementary schools. They're our two biggest, and aside from our high school, I believe they're our two newest buildings in the district. And when you make those education centers, you've added a ton of elementary school space into the equation. And then you've got to now reassess what that means. And so I think it's a resultant change of that decision. And I think that's just something that we've got to, if we continue this path and we ultimately decide to do this, the communication model, and like you said, really has to be key, because at first glance, it could be very much perceived as just closing schools. But it is so much more than that. Like you said, it is a big thing to bite off. But I think, I think that, and that board member that had reached out to me, I mean, one of my takeaways from that conversation is people have been asking for this for a long time, and it's just been kind of too big of an undertaking.
Down the road, yeah, nobody wanted.
Yeah, and I mean, if we as a board want to do this, that's what we need to know as a committee. And if this is not the right time, if this is not the direction that this board wants to see, then we can just redo boundaries and deal with some overcapacity at VO and Jenny Barker, like the boundary study originally just kind of set out to do, and we can continue. But that's what we need to the board decide.
I do support, I do think the right thing, and Mark's right, I think nobody has ever argued that the grade reconfiguration, I think is the right thing to do. And most of the community, I think, agrees with that as well. I do like the K568 model. I like obviously we're gonna have to add to KH. That's what I would like to see. I'd like this to go down that road. We'll do the redistrict or the reconfiguration. We're obviously gonna have to get a plan in place to do something with KH. And then that's kind of where redraw the boundaries and then kind of go from there. I'd like to see that data. I wish I knew that answer of if we do the grade reconfiguration, keep all schools as they are, or repurpose, early childhood, or keep one online or whatever, I'd like to see those numbers. I'd like to have 2 years under my belt of, we did all this is where we're at. But unfortunately, that comes with an extended time period because of construction and all. That's not an answer we can get right away. So I do support the stepped model that we talked about. I think that's a good idea, not just because there is some plans that need to take place.
That's why I'm okay if we move this, instead of implementing it 25, 26, move it to 26, 27, so that we know this is where we think we're going to go, but we have plenty of time to plan. And there's some financial savings that are not gonna come if we do that. And some of that's how we pay for the KH without having to borrow money. So, it's kind of a double-edged sword. But that's why I'm okay if we have to slow it down a little bit so that we can do it methodically and we can do it right. And we're never gonna we don't have a crystal ball. If we did, this would be easy. But I have a lot of the same concerns as you do.
That's my fear is, everything somebody said earlier, every decision we make, there's a tertiary effect to that. Well, if we make so many decisions, we're gonna drown because there's gonna be too many unknowns and too many things that are gonna come and bite us from behind. So I'd like to be able to work one problem at a time and then get that done. Okay, we did the grade reconfiguration, we redrew boundaries. This is where we're at now. Okay, now we can work on those problems. And then once we get an iron out plan, then we move forward with the next step. So some kind of stepped or staged approach, like you said, is, I think, definitely the right answer for sure.
I kind of feel that, I guess Randy kind of said it better than I did, but I kind of feel the same way. I would feel better about a plan that starts in a year, but transitions maybe over a longer period. Maybe it's 7 to 10 years, rather than everything done in 3 to 4 years.
And then I just popped into my head. We talked about it the other day. what do we do? You know, we set this plan in place, we get it all in motion, and then there's an election a year and a half from now and the board flips. And then, you know, I guess they'll have to live with some of the decisions we made, but, you know, I just throw that out there, but, yeah. That's all I have.
Yeah, I just have a question about that, like, so you guys are gonna have to help me with this. So if we want to get to a grade reconfiguration, like as a first step, what do we do with Charles Stone's and Bernadine sits in that? I mean, I'm not figuring that out. I mean, because if we go to a grade configuration, then we have to turn those two into elementaries. We're gonna have way smaller class sizes and a need for more teachers in my mind. But correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm not seeing that.
Well, one of the things that
Go ahead, Eddie, I'm sorry.
But one of the reasons they kind of factored into this step model of K6 and then into K5 was, I think you made the comment that we could go K6 in these buildings relatively easy. So making the change of adding a sixth grade level to, go our fifth and sixth grade level to most of our elementary schools is not a significant change. And ultimately we can't put sixth graders at either, well, particularly KH until the work's done, until the building has been expanded upon. And so, the plan that we've been looking at so far of implementing the change in the building consolidations starts the financing equation, kind of gets the thing, starts pulling off capital outlay projects that were planned for those buildings and starts bringing them into the financing mechanism for KH expansion. And then it's kind of rooted in that Josh's guidance there that it's doable to put sixth grade into fifth and sixth grade into these buildings without a lot of changes to the building.
Yeah. You'd have to redraw all the boundaries to do that because you'd have to have, Sits and Stones right now don't have an elementary boundary. So they would be into that equation. And so instead of having 11 elementary schools, we would have 13 elementary schools. And so we'd be moving kids around. But I think Andy's logic to that, like what he's explaining, the logic to that is when we go in 3 years or whenever KH is online and we're ready to move sixth grade in, the boundaries would stay the same. It's just the sixth graders those fifth graders that were fifth grade this year, when KH opened the following year, they would just go to KH a year earlier than they would in seventh grade. And those boundaries would be the same boundaries. But we would have to adjust boundaries pretty significantly to make that happen.
So just to recap what Josh just said, you could go K6 pretty easily. Jenny Wilson and Jordan.
That's where I was gonna go next. So Jenny Wilson
would struggle with going K6.
They would have to be one track schools. Both Jenny Wilson and Georgia Matthews would stay. Well, Jenny Wilson's a 2-track school currently. They don't have the capacity to be a 2-track school. Fifth grade they can do. Up to sixth grade they can't. We don't have the room in either one of them they'd have to stay one track.
You don't have 12 available class. You couldn't put 12 classrooms in those buildings.
But it would be 14 in kindergarten.
With kindergarten, okay.
And there's only 13 in each of those buildings.
Okay, so there would be single track schools during that transition period.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
But then they could be a 2-track school when they go to K5.
Yeah.
Permanently. So there may be some challenges. I mean, this concept of drawing boundaries that are undisturbed when you make the transition from K6 to K5. Maybe that's too idealistic. I mean, you couldn't, otherwise, if you took a single track school and then made it a 2-track school, you'd go from like 23 kids to 11 and 12 kids, which would be underutilized. So
Yeah.
maybe it's not perfect. Maybe but I think that's like the goal as we get into that. I'd really press like, how can we either keep them exactly the same or keep them change from the phase 1 to phase 2 step minimal.
Do you guys have a ballpark cost to do the KH removal, or is that not so?
Yeah, so based on the assumption of 13,500 square feet at 480 per square foot, that's 6.48 million, adding in 10% for soft costs to furnish it and all of that is 7.128 million.
And one of the problems, if you keep all the schools open for a period of time, that doesn't help with the financing we're just talking about right here, because you're still gonna have to maintain all of those buildings.
Yeah, there's HVAC projects on the horizon at those buildings. In this next 3 to 4 year window, there's roofing projects, flooring projects that were all slated to happen at those buildings.
Was that like about $4 million, wasn't it?
So I need to visit with Drew and make sure that he and the new plant facilities director are gonna adjust the long range facilities, but based on the old one, like almost 6.7 million is slated for fiscal year 25 just in those 4 buildings. And the following year, 900,000 just in those 4.
That's the elementary schools, right?
Yes. Not including VO, just the other 4.
Anybody else? So I guess we kind of just need to come to a conclusion on a direction to help, right, that's our ultimate goal, yeah.
Next step.
What, I think we all agree that the grade reconfiguration is where the direction we want to go, is that right? I mean, I think we all see the value in that, and it's better for our students. Now we just need to decide what's the step, what's it look like next after that?
Talked a little about overall time frame for that kind of initiation, like that decision to initiate the plan. Like the decision to make the commitment to the plan. And then actually, when does it actually start, you know? Like what would the school year be where those buildings are closed or repurposed? But when as a board, I guess, because this will kind of set the cadence of our group. We've been meeting every 2 weeks. If we as a board want to set a goal to make this go, no go decision by near the start of this school year, let's say sometime in August or sometime in September, we may need to start meeting weekly to continue to get through this. So I would like to get some sort of an idea from the board as to your feelings on a timeline for that go, no go board vote to implement this, to make the change. And then that'll help us decide frequency we need to continue to meet, kind of what we need to do as a subcommittee.
We had originally proposed, which meeting did we talk about? I can't remember which one. But we had
Second, first meeting in September.
first meeting is, so September 9th was the original thought of, if we make a decision there, then we can begin to plan everything out. And so that's where we committed at that last meeting to meet weekly.
Yeah.
The administration along with.
And what I'm saying when we say make a decision, like that would be a board vote to implement grade reconfiguration and close or repurpose these buildings and make that all those big picture, big element decisions committed to, and then the work begins on all the additional decisions that go on after that.
And there's a lot of legal steps. Jennifer presented that to us. Once we make that decision, there's still a lot of like legal stuff that we have to go through.
Yeah, I mean, we started, like in the last meeting, we talked about specific school properties, and if we sell it, what are the steps we have to go through? Can we, I mean, you know, like one of the ideas, can we, how do we sell it? Can we sell? Like I threw out, you know, Georgia Matthews is, if that building were to be demoed, it's right in the heart of town, right? In my mind, I'm like, maybe that should be platted as residential lots and that gets sold out as residential lots and that helps create an opportunity for new housing right in town. You know, and then we asked her like, what does that look like? How do we do that? And she's, you know, do we do that? Do we demo the building and replat it and then sell it as lots? Or do we sell it to one person? And she talked about restricted covenants where you can sell it conditional that they must do that. So that's I think what you're talking about, the legalities. And again, this is an idea, but like you got to put context to an idea so you can start asking more detailed questions.
Do we have any more services from RSB, or are we paid up and they're done? I'm
I
saying
would
like,
say we still are owed a boundary study.
okay, that
I mean,
was
so
my question.
to your point on the next steps, and this is what I heard everybody, you know, gleans what they glean. You're going to K6, give us a boundary, that gives us the best idea to be able to move to if and when KH gets built out, those individuals would not change again as far as the boundary, but I could have misheard that. So I don't know that that's what was said. It's what I gleaned from what we were talking about. But
I think
the boundary, I think they owe us a boundary study.
Okay, I just was trying to think about if there was another cost coming. I'd like to see two models. One going forward with the plan, repurposing the schools, and then one where we just are right now leaving everything open and doing something with stones and sits.
So when you say, you mean a model where we have done grade reconfiguration, sits and stones are now elementary schools.
Or early childhood or whatever we do with them.
But we don't close any buildings.
Right, or we close one of those down or a building and keep it online in case we need it.
So that would, correct me if I'm wrong, that would be drastic differences though. Because we can't pay for the Kenneth Henderson expansion.
Right,
So then KH, if we went 6 through 8 there, it makes the numbers between the two schools significantly. It increases the number at Horace Good.
I would like to see it with closing two that are the highest cost of maintenance over the next several years. Let's plan the two, whichever two schools that might be. Maybe with not doing 4, but rather than just 2.
How do you feel about that, Randy? About that scenario, is that is the second scenario?
yeah, it makes sense, and I mean, I get what you're saying. For the savings, we're hoping to pay for the remodel.
That's how,
it's
yeah,
coming
that's how
from
we're
it.
gonna pay for it, yeah. And if it makes you feel any better, I've been going to all the meetings and I'm almost as conflicted as you.
I just, and I'll be honest, this is what goes through my head and, you know, we really want to see if the people really want to close down schools or not. Let's put it to a bond to add on to KH and see if it passes. If it passes, then we'll really know that public does not want to close down any schools. But I don't think that's the right answer, but. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Jessica, I'm sure we don't have this pot of money just sitting there.
And we all committed to meeting weekly if we need to. So like, we're okay.
Oh, I know,
with
you
that.
guys have done amazing work and I know it's tough.
So are we to consensus then moving forward? Mark, did you have anything else to add to the request so far, looking at these options?
No, I think that, yeah, and I understand the concerns and all this. I think that moving forward with that 3-year plan, looking and seeing what we could do with that. Great, like I said earlier, the great reconfiguration I think is a given. Anybody express concerns about not doing that?
John, anything else?
No, I think I said earlier, that, I think I'm in favor of moving forward with the phased approach, like, I mean, once Jessica threw the numbers out to me, I think it's even a little bit clearer there. I mean, if you're looking at spending $7.5 million in those 4 buildings in the next 2 years, and the expansion costs $7.1 million, I mean, it ain't all about numbers. That does bring a little clarity to it.
Well, and I think it just, for me, the day that it dawned on me, part of the reason we needed to close buildings is because we added 2 buildings, and we shifted kids back to the middle schools where they probably should have been. So it's not all about even the decrease in population. It's about we put kids in other buildings that now we have these 2 buildings that are nice big buildings open. So that's part of what's causing we need to shut some buildings down. So we're making 2 other buildings have more students.
2 of our biggest buildings in the district.
Yeah.
And our 2 newest,
Yeah.
besides Garden City High School.
Want us to shoot for, I guess that's where we need to know for planning purposes. Are we looking for a 1st of September vote? So we need to meet weekly, or do we just continue meeting every other week indefinitely?
I kind of throw that back in your guys' court. I don't want to rush you. So if you take what time you need.
I think we all talked about this last meeting. I think we're committed to doing it. We might have to find a different time of day to make that happen if we're gonna do that. But yeah, I feel like it's important, me personally, I feel like it's important for our community, for our staff, for our students, families, that we get to a point of decision and we don't drag this into the school year. So people know they can plan and we can, the process of moving forward can begin. Maybe implementation is 25, 26, 27, not 25, 26. I think once we make that big decision, then we start digging into that next layer, then we kind of figure out how quickly those other things materialize, those other plans that materialize and the feasibility of it. But I do think that the big decision from the board, I would like us to be able to give everybody in our community this whole school year of knowing, and then ultimately that plan of implementation that has got to get made, we got to stay on it even after we make this first big decision is what I'm saying. Maybe we don't have to, maybe we can go back to meeting every 2 weeks for a little while, but I think that we don't just take the foot off the gas and we have to keep working towards this decisions and all the decisions that follow. That's my opinion. How do you?
I just want you to have the time that you feel like you need, not make rushed decisions.
Do you feel like it's feasible?
Yeah, and if we work through to September 1st and we're like, hey guys, we don't have this in something we're ready to present, then we just don't present yet. But we move forward planning to do that.
Next steps, just so everybody hears it one more time. You want to tell us the next steps?
Sounds like we're meeting next week.
And I'm fine with the next steps. If we look at the boundaries and then reconfigure K6 immediately.
Like a phased approach, okay? Continue to work down the path of the phase K6 into K5 transition. I also wrote down, Randy and Jackie, also evaluate a model similar, but only closing the two elementary schools that have the highest upcoming capital improvement needs.
The two buildings, just
That-
to make
like-
sure.
And I would add, or geography, location to that too. I mean, because, or I
But
guess,
logically is the best.
well, yeah, I mean, better close down a small building than a big building. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Just logically that, yeah. So yes,
Okay.
Did you want an option with no building closures?
and I would like to see that.
So 3
But
years.
I know that answer right now is, well, then how do we pay for Cage? So that's the problem that we'd have to, Robert made that very clear.
But seeing it in front of your face
Yeah.
sometimes makes sense.
I think it's good to look at that too, and that's why I was asking for help, kind of how we do that. But the thing that concerns me the most about that is how many students will be affected, because we are affecting students in every building now and disrupting learning in every building. But I want to look at it. I would like to see.
I would like to see one without,
But I'm
plan
concerned about
without
our,
closing down
we're
buildings.
concerned about our students.
And even if that plan is, ultimately you guys come up with the plan is we need a bond, well, that's a plan and we can say no to that. You know what I mean? Or like, that's not an option, so next. At least we can say to the public and to us, we thought about that. Okay. Next board meeting will be July, this is the board meeting, so next board meeting will be July 22nd at 6 p.m. Board meeting room at the Educational Sports Center. I would entertain a motion to adjourn. There's a second? Second. It's been moved and second to adjourn. All in favor, raise your left hand. Opposed, same?